Thank you very much for having me here. I know how it's dangerous to compete with coffee, but I will try. Because my laptop burned down yesterday, along with my presentation in text, I have changed the topic a little bit, but I think it's the best way because we have two presentations about external migration, but I want to come back to internal migration. And in my presentation, I will talk about the experience of forced displacement of residents from the war-torn territories of Ukraine after 2014 and before the start of full-scale aggression against Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. What took place in Ukraine from spring 2014 and before 24 February 2022 can today be classified as the first phase of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Why it's so important for me? We talk about something that have a start and ended. And we have processes which are radically different. But when we are focused on this stage, we start to understand why Ukraine, in these situations, was ready to resist, was ready to react in different way to the full-scale aggression. Then, on this slide, yeah, 1 second. On this slide, I'm not focused on this slide very long, but I want to show you that we start our research from 2014, from the initial stage of Russian aggression. And in this case, we collected a huge base of in-depth interview. Now it's near 400 in-depth interview with different people who, in different way, involved in the situation, have a connection to the situation. And it's a huge collection which give us the opportunity to detailize as possible as as it possible all information about internal migration. Why it's so important? It was the main task for us to detailize this because usually if you look on the level of state policy, we see that the politicians perceive this group like a homogeneous group. It's a very big mistake, and we try to show that it's a very segmented group with absolutely different way of perception of the reality, different needs, etc., etc. And this segmentation was a main task for us when we conduct this research. And first idea, when we start and compile, we need to understand this difference between these two waves or two situations in Ukraine. In Ukraine, we have two different cases when we talk about internal migration. And first, it's soft, so-called bloodless, without use weapon, occupation of Crimean Peninsula, subsequently led to its annexation and incorporation to the Russian Federation as a separate federal district. Here we have officially 6 killed people and 10 disappeared. In absolutely other situation, it's a Russian invasion of parts of the Donetsk and Lugansk region, accompanied by simulated internal civil conflict and referendums, which led to formation of the quasi-state entities, so-called DPR and LPR, on these territories. And here we see absolutely our situation. We have more than 44,000 losses at all, and of these it's more than 13, but I see the other dates, it's near 15,000 killed people, and from 29 to 33,000 wounded, and 25% of these losses were civilians. Why we have this difference number? Now we know the experience in Bucha, in Irpin, and in other cities. After liberation, I think we received the new data about killed people on this territory. But it's still under occupation, and we know the real number of people who were killed during this stage. Then, as you can see on this slide, most civilian deaths occurred in 2014-2015 during the active phase of hostilities in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. This scheme clearly illustrates the dubiousness of Russian thesis about the need to protect the so-called people of Donbas, because once the active phase of the Russian invasion is over and occupation is formalized, hostilities actually stop. In the following, Sorry. In the following slide, you can see the dynamic of registered IDPs in Ukraine before the outbreak of full-scale war. To show you this dynamic, I have used a good visualization from the publication linked on the slide. In Ukraine, all this data is public and available on the website of the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine, but my colleague very good visualized this. And we see that the number of registered IDPs in Ukraine remains relatively stable during all this stage. And we usually talk about 1.5 million people who are registered during this time and before the full-scale war. On this map, on the left side, you see the location of officially registered IDPs before the full-scale Russian aggression. As you can see, most of displaced persons tried to settle close to their homes in occupied territory. You ask about these strategies, how close and how far. It's play role, and we see here, it's really play role for many people. And in our interview, our interlocutor says that it was very important for them be so close to their homes as it possible, because it's a way how to check their condition in their flat. It's the possibility to come back and back to Ukraine after this visit of occupied territories. The large number of IDPs in Kyiv was due to Kyiv's attractiveness as a capital, where all the key state structures are located. The choice in favor of Kyiv was rationally based on the fact that it put IDP close to the government structure, providing assistance. For many of our IDPs, it was very important. For example, it's still before the present day, people who forcibly displaced from Crimea Peninsula are not resident for Ukrainian bank system. It's a very problematic situation. For example, I have one very interesting conversation with my interlocutor who was labor migrants, and during 10 years before 2014 live in Kyiv, and he woke up once a day and understand that he is not resident for Ukrainian bank system. It's a very problematic situation, but it's a situation of many people in Ukraine. And then you see another line of regions, Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Zaporizhia, which are also located in the eastern and southeastern part of Ukraine. In this case, people who had been affected by the war could resettle in the territories that remained under the control of Ukrainian government, but very close to their homes. But on the next on the right side of the slide, you see a visualization of displacement taking place in face of full-scale Russian aggression in 2022. The situation is radically different. Most of IDPs have tried to move as far away from the armed conflict zone as possible. Then, another interesting detail become apparent if we look at the settlement map of IDPs in terms of their social demographic parameters. In 2015, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees published a map showing not only the total number of IDPs by oblast, but also data on the proportion of different groups of forced migrants, such as pensioners, working-age adults, children, disabled. And in this case, we see that a significant number of pensioners registered close to the demarcation line spent most of their time in their homes in occupied territory due to the financial difficulties and the absence of a systematic policy of state support. They came to Ukraine to undergo identification procedures, which remained compulsory and regular every few months for pensioners before pandemic. The situation changed dramatically with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, before the pandemic, there were about 1 million monthly crossings in both directions. With the April 2020 restrictions on crossing at checkpoints, the number of monthly crossings fell to 2,000 and was no longer back to the previous level until the full-scale Russian invasion. It's a very good resources. It's in interactive apps, and you can check each day of a number of crossing border during this period. These facts demonstrate the problematic nature of counting the actual number of IDPs, as registration does not allow indicate a person's actual presence in the territory controlled by the Ukrainian government. And on this slide, you see a main vectors of external forced migration in this time from Ukraine. And the countries of arrival did not grant refugee statuses in most cases. as only a small part of the territory of Ukraine was covered by the war, and Ukrainians themselves have not sought refugee statuses because of significant restrictions on employment. In World Migration Report, it's last, it's all numbers. It's very important when we talk about the situation to remember all these numbers about what we are talking here. In World Migration Report 2020, Ukraine mentioned in the list of the top 20 countries. And as you can see here, more than 2 million people have left the uncontrolled territories in 2014. Then we talk about 1.5 million of people who officially have the status of IDPs in Ukraine. Then we need to remember about near 400,000 people who seeking different kind of refugee statuses, and more than 700,000 Ukrainians seeking other forms of legal stay in different countries. And the last one, as you see here, and it's very important for me, it's 3.7 million people who live on occupied territory, and they formally remain the citizens of Ukraine. We very often talk about this category of people on this territory, but it's a very stigmatized category of people in Ukrainian public discourses. But it's very important to remember about this very big number of people who are still a citizen of Ukraine. But on our first day, we talk about this, and we talk about the passport like an identificator, which gives us the opportunity to talk about Ukrainians, Russians, etc., etc. I see a very big problem in this way. It's not identificator of the person, because many people who now live on occupied territory have an opportunity to have 5 or 6 passports. What I mean in this case, first passport, it's a very interesting detail. First passport, it's a Ukrainian passport, Ukrainian internal passport. Then it's officially possible in Ukraine to have 2 international passports. Then, if I'm not before the start of full-scale aggression on this territory, we have 700,000 people who take Russian passports, and they have a right to have international Russian passports. And of course, it's passports of citizens of the DPR and LPR. And in this case, passports play a very specific role, and we need to understand that it's not identificator at all. When we talk about citizenship, when we talk about identity, it's very problematic to talk what it means if you have 5 or 6 passports in this situation. But I'm not sure that we still have time. 2 minutes, okay. As I start, in the beginning of my presentation, I said that our main task was the fighting with this perception of this group like a homogeneous group, and we work with different kind of people who have, in some way, have a relation to the situation. On these photos, I want to show you several photos, because I make this photo on 0 point between controlled by Ukraine territory and uncontrolled territories, and how it's look like. Usually it's many people who are retirement age, who need to stay in the long queues, and it was really very difficult for many of them. Especially it was difficult for people with limited mobility, and according to the numbers, people with limited mobility have not access to many Ukrainian services, and in this case we need to talk about over 500,000 people who have not access to Ukrainian services because they are limited mobility. And as a picture, it's not my picture in this case, but it's a very demonstrate how it was. It's really very good demonstrate how it was, because in this Stanitsa Luganskaya, people go across the broken bridge before the end of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. It's a very long period when people have this very big problem with this access to Ukraine and access to Ukraine territory and access to Ukrainian services. As of today, heated discussion about the possibility of paying pensions to so-called collaborators seem to have subsided. The Ukrainian state demonstrates maximum loyalty in the accrual of pensions to those who have earned it according to the solidarity pension system in Ukraine, wherever they are located, after early ambiguous statements about the population of the occupied territories. Government officials now clearly articulate the peoples as a state primary value. It's a very big change in Ukrainian society, and we see this change because of this long period of humiliating procedure to many people who want to have these Ukrainian services because they are citizens of Ukraine. And yeah.